let me introduce to you Olivia Windham Stewart, one of the panel members, who will give a short introduction on what already Alexander was referring to, and what for me is the mantra of this meeting. We have 3 pillars, we have 12 focus areas, and based on that we get some metrics to really show progress on these different focus areas. And the lady who has been involved from the beginning, since April, very much in this process, she facilitated a lot of meetings and focus groups, is Olivia Windham Stewart, an independent business and human rights specialist. She worked formerly in the CNA Foundation, now Laudes, and she's very, I've noticed that in the last week, very passionate about this issue. And due to the key importance of these of pillars and focus areas, she will explain in the following 5, 6, 7 minutes what the process has been and what these pillars are. Already the names were mentioned by Alexander, and she will deep dive into some details of the social areas, focus areas. Sorry. Olivia, very much welcome, and talk to us from the seaside of the UK.
Thank you, Pierre. Thanks very much. Welcome, everybody. It's so nice to see you all. Particularly those who came to the working sessions. I'm particularly grateful to the person who said that the Industry We Want working sessions were one of the things that inspired them over the last 6 months in the answers. So whoever that was, thank you very much. We're glad to hear it. As Pierre said, we are going to take you through, give you an overview of the starting point of this initiative, and then have this deep dive into the different pillars. So the starting point for the Industry We Want was really this idea that we are keen to accelerate industry-wide progress and change. And that to do that, to really push the industry all together, we need to look at these 3 pillars. So we need to look at the social, we need to look at the environmental, but really crucially, we need to look at the commercial, because as we've seen more critically than any other time in the industry over the last year, the commercial dynamics are having huge impacts on how the social and environmental progress comes into play. So this was also a call made very loudly at the event in January. You saw the video with many actors saying social, commercial, economic dynamics in the industry really need to be addressed comprehensively altogether. And it's something we've then heard throughout all of our consultations since January right up to today. And I've seen many of you chiming in on the chat to say that you really support that kind of 3-pillar approach that we're proposing that we take with the Industry We Want. So thank you for that. Now, after we'd established our overarching 3-pillar approach, we began to explore this idea of determining underneath those 3 pillars 4 key focus areas for change within each pillar. So 12 metrics overall that would benefit from these ideas that we've been discussing. So enhanced data collection and measurement, improved collaboration and action, increased alignment. And that by doing these things, by working together and inspiring that collective and collaborative action, we can also work to potentially inform and support policy change that can really push for this industry-wide progress that we seek in the garment and footwear sector. So that's not just progress for a brand or a set of brands or a facility or a country, but really across the whole garment and footwear industry. So central to this process, as we've been discussing lightly throughout the event, is this idea of these 12 metrics. So 1 for each focus area that could help us determine, maybe on an annual basis, whether we are achieving progress in each of these areas that we've identified as specifically important under each of these pillars. So to determine these focus areas or metrics, which you can see here up on the screen, we'll fill them in as we go along, we conducted a series of different consultations over the last few months. So these range from in-depth one-to-one consultations with different stakeholders, many of whom came to the event in January and have been keen to participate ever since. And also these online working sessions where we worked with a number of people on this call and otherwise to really explore where is the focus that we need to, where do we need to really put our attention in social, where do we need to put our attention in commercial, where do we need to put our attention in environmental. And we also conducted a number of focus groups in production countries with workers, trade unions, and suppliers. And a lot of the videos that you're seeing today with the quotes, those are directly from those focus groups. So we're really trying to share that with you today because that was a big part of our process, doing that work in production countries. And so through this varied consultation, we've established now these 12 clear focus areas with the potential for metrics that stakeholders really seem to agree are in need of greater progress and industry-wide attention, so we can really speed up change in these areas. So I'm just going to take you through these metrics very quickly, and then we will go to the panel and discuss them in a bit more detail. So starting with the environmental pillar, we explored a number of different issues and discussed a number of different ways of measuring the environmental impacts of the industry, which we know are very profound. And again, well, notwithstanding some good debates on how exactly we would do this and what the exact approach should be, we settled on, and we're proposing these 4 indicators, which you will see on your screen now. So the first is greenhouse gas emissions. Now, this was one that people felt very passionately should be a top ranking issue. And as in many of our focus areas, a number of initiatives exist that track progress on this issue in particular circumstances. What we're proposing with the industry we want is to bring these initiatives together really under this kind of big tent philosophy that we're trying to encourage. And we start to develop an industry-wide metric that we can track on an annual basis how we're doing as a sector, because obviously it's also a sector that's growing. So progress in one area may be offset if there is a backsliding or growth in another area. Second to GHG emissions was waste, which is another key issue. There was a very rich discussion about where and what kind of waste it is important to address in the garment and footwear industry, because it is a long and complex sector, and it also includes, of course, use phase and post-consumer, but we'll say more about the scope of the initiative as we move through the conversation. Third was water. It's an issue that generated, again, a lot of discussion and interest amongst stakeholders. Whether it's water use or water contamination, there's clearly a very strong appetite for better understanding and sharing progress on how we're doing on this issue, and whether or not we're really moving together as an industry. And finally, for the environment, chemicals was the 4th issue the stakeholders really felt would benefit for this accelerated industry-wide progress. And again, a number of very good initiatives exist that are making excellent progress here. So we're really discussing the approach that could be taken by the industry we want to support alignment and encourage collaboration to make this change that we're seeking. So we'll move on now to the social pillar. So as with environmental, there was actually a very clear consensus on the issues most in need of accelerated and industry-wide progress and measurement in the social pillar. Now, the first, not surprisingly, the first one to receive the most consistent attention was wages. And wages was, again, not surprisingly, the word that probably came up the most throughout all of our consultations with different stakeholders. We need progress on wages. It needs to be faster. It needs to be more significant. And we had a number of very interesting discussions, again, about the angle we should take if we look at this. Are we looking at minimum wages, average wages, lowest wages, living wages, the wage gap? So we're going to be taking some of these ideas forward as we progress with the initiative. In addition to this, there was a very strong desire to focus on social protection. So a metric that might be able to assess the extent and quality of coverage for garment and footwear workers across the sector, which is of course an issue that is more pressing than ever in the wake of the pandemic. We've seen what the lack of social protection, the consequences of that have for garment and footwear workers in this industry. And the third is collective bargaining. So CBA coverage, by which we really mean across the industry, the number of workers who are covered by collective bargaining agreements that provide more than the legal minimum. And at the, underneath this, of course, our support for freedom of association. And finally, access to remedy, or really the provision of remedy in the event that rights have been violated, is another area people are keen to see bigger, more collaborated action and data. So those are our metrics for social. Now moving on to commercial, our third pillar.
Brief on the commercial ones, Olivia, due to our given time planning.
Brief, yes, sorry, okay, I'll be brief. There's a lot to say on these, apologies. Okay, so quickly on commercial, the first one is purchasing practices. That is to say, this was also a very key issue that came out in the course of the discussions, kind of equal to wages. Commercial is slightly less chartered territory. There are some initiatives here, but we're keen to accelerate the progress, and you'll hear more about that later. Second is risk sharing or buyer power. We hear often from suppliers that the system is structured so they're taking all the risk and not distributing enough of the reward. This is again related to the third pillar, which is about profit and value distribution. So again, related to this issue of who is taking the reward and who is taking the risk, and how we can recalibrate the industry so that more people are sharing in the gains. And finally, related to all of these is the issue of inequality. So this is the metric We had some really interesting ideas, from a Gini coefficient to a purchasing power parity metric. And in some ways, this is a kind of overarching or fundamental indicator, because enhancing equality across this sector should really lie at the center of all we do and the center of all these metrics. And that's our kind of proposition. So that's a whistle-stop tour. Sorry if it was a bit longer, Pierre, but I will hand back over to you and we can move through the panel.
Okay, thank you, Olivia. Yes, and explaining 3 pillars and 12 focus areas is not an easy task to do in 5 to 6 minutes, especially if you have been involved in that already for many months, days and sometimes nights. So thank you very much for this update. So just to summarize, it's 3 pillars, it's 12 focus areas, and of course all this information can be found on the website of the industry we want to really go and read again.